So, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be presenting Building Relationships in a Hybrid Workplace by Allison Horak. Just a little housekeeping before we get started here. This session is being recorded. At the end of the webinar, I will provide links for accessing the slide deck and recording in the chat, so please stay tuned. To ensure a high quality recording, all attendees are encouraged to mute your mic. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. We will get to them if time allows. Finally, I will take a minute here to introduce our presenter. Allison is an independent training consultant and a member of the California and Oregon State Bars. While working as an in-house counsel for Oregon Corporation, she handled litigation matters as well as training and educating corporate members on various legal issues. Allison has also been a solo practitioner, managing various transactional, litigation, and probate matters for clients. Now, without further ado, Allison, take it away.
Thank you, Marissa. And everything that Marissa said is accurate. But because this is on my mind, I am coming up on my 10-year anniversary of being a trainer, because that kind of makes it sound like I'm still practicing, which I mean, I am a member of both of those bars, but on October 1st, I will have my 10-year anniversary of being in this world of training. And that may seem weird, but I'll just say, haven't regretted that decision, y'all. So anyway, I hope that it comes out in our hour together that I enjoy what I do. So thanks for all the kind comments in the chat. And I'm sure you all understand, we're up to, at least according to my controls, about 136 people. So I really love that you all are active in the chat, and there are several places in our hour together where I will specifically ask you a question, but at any time you could put something in the chat, but I'm sure you understand my limitations as a human. I won't be able to read everything, but I'll do my best, and if I maybe ask an open-ended question, I'll pull out a couple of answers here and there just in the interest of time. Okay, so thanks for your understanding with that. I'm going to start with a couple of statistics just to get our buy-in on this topic of building relationships in a hybrid workplace. So this comes from a survey, a very recent survey that Gensler did. And just in case you're not familiar, you might be like, is that an HR company? No. Some of you may know, but it's an architectural firm, actually. And it might be like, well, why do I care what an architectural firm thinks about this topic? Well, I mean, they have a vested interest in knowing what's the future of work and how are our workplaces going to look, because they are dealing with the construction and the real estate, involved in these workplaces. And so they really want to know, and they've done quite a bit of research on this, actually worldwide. This is from their US survey. So they found that around 70% of corporate leaders plan to offer a hybrid, or are offering already a hybrid work arrangement. So that is, I mean, we could all agree, a majority, right? A majority of leaders plan to offer a hybrid work arrangement. And only 13% of those people surveyed said that they expected to decrease their real estate footprint, suggesting, of course, that hybrid workplaces are the future. So not full-time in person, not full-time remote, but some kind of, it's kind of this big squishy question mark, but like it's not going to be the same everywhere, but it is some kind of mix. Hopefully the best bits of both of those, right, is the ideal hybrid working environment. The things that were great about working from home and the things that were great about being in the office, we're trying to meld those somehow. And it is organization by organization, and maybe team to team what works, but some kind of mix seems to be where we're headed. And so if we can do this well, when we are in person, it could really be a magnet that brings people together and helps us work even better than before. I'm not trying to be kind of goody two shoes about that, but I think that's true. And what's at stake though, if we don't get this right, we could really be threatening like our team culture, our organizational culture, our ability to collaborate and innovate. And, if we look at those three things, culture, collaboration, innovation, what's at the heart of those? It's really, of course, the humans, right? The relationships. So I'm going to share the three areas that I intend for us to talk about in our hour together today. And I think you all know this, but there is a half day. So in other words, a longer version of this course that will be available in early October. So this is meant to, of course, give substance, good information in our hour, but there is a longer version, and we'll have a link for that at the end of class if you're interested in signing up. Okay, so in our hour together, we're going to touch upon these three topics. The first one is proximity bias. What is it? How can we spot it? And what can we do about it? All right, next is how can we create this community within our team, this at least somewhat social aspect. And just in case already you're having a little bit of mental pushback to that when I say social, because I kind of do. And I mean, I'm an individual contributor and, I kind of go like, okay, when I'm at work, like I want to work. I'm not really looking for a party or, I mean, parties are great, but how can I, like, yes, the human relationships are important, but I also want to get actual work done if I've got to be in the office. And so how can we do this, kind of bring people together, acknowledge the human side, without it being like, let's just come to the office and have a party every Friday or whatever. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then how can we balance this me work and we work, the time I have alone and the time that I have in the office. Like, how do I know what ideally what should be happening in when I'm home or remote and when I'm in the office? Okay, so those are the three areas that we'll talk about. So let's start with the first one. Identifying and overcoming proximity bias. So the first thing I just want to say is it's a thing. It is an actual thing. I mean, there's a lot of talk about bias and how to spot it. And I think those are important discussions, of course. And then like a subset of just bias is unconscious bias, which is not to say like we write it off like, oh, it was unconscious. I didn't even know I was doing it. So I guess it's okay. Oh, no. The takeaway is not, since I didn't know it was happening, I guess it's okay. The takeaway is I didn't know it was happening. Now I know it's happening because now I have a label for it and now I need to do something about it. That's like with all unconscious biases, but we're specifically focusing on the one that definitely pertains to our topic. It's proximity bias. So some of you, I'm sure, have heard of it. That may be a new term for others. And so just so we're all on the same page, here's a definition. The unconscious tendency to favor the people who are in the office, like geographically in the cubicle next to us or right outside of our office door or whatever, or the people in our time zone. That may, I'm sure there are some people here who your whole team is in one time zone, but there are probably exceptions to that in our group today also. And so just it's kind of an opportunity for personal reflection. Do I favor the people who are in the office with me versus my folks who are remote or hybrid? And is that fair? And if you do have a time zone issue, you could think about, do I always schedule meetings that are convenient for the West Coast versus my team? I've got a handful of people who are in New York or whatever. So really thinking about that. This is kind of an academic way of describing it, defining it. And I think it's accurate. I'm going to be a tiny bit more harsh with the second definition. It's also accurate in my opinion, but maybe cutting to the chase a little bit more, here it is. Proximity bias is any prejudice against remote workers because they're remote. And we could throw in the word hybrid also, remote at least part of the time, right? Okay, so, prejudice is a word that makes us uncomfortable because we all know it's not good. And so that's why I'm saying that's a little bit of a harsher definition. But let's just think for a moment, how might this come up? Because I think it's very easy to say, like with any bias or prejudice, right? It's easy to say, well, I don't do that. Okay, maybe a healthier response is maybe I'm doing it and I don't know. So let's think about how that might show up in the workplace. These are just some examples. Maybe it shows up like who gets more face time with the boss, one-on-one time. Just because I'm remote, I should have equal access to my supervisor or manager as anybody else. Maybe it shows up like this. Who gets called on first in a meeting, or who gets called on more often in a meeting? And so this is important for anyone here who facilitates meetings. And I have some advice about hybrid meetings. In other words, meetings where some people are online and some people are in person. Here's my advice. I'm just going to put it out there. Don't do it. Don't do it. Either have everybody have to be on a device, whether they're in the office or not, or everybody has to be present in the office. I don't personally, you may think I'm being a little judgmental about it, but I don't personally think hybrid meetings really work. They're not ideal. And it's a fertile ground for this proximity bias. Okay, another way it might show up, who gets these high profile assignments? It's very easy to have something come across your desk if you're a supervisor and you just kind of step out of your cubicle or step out of your office and look around. Oh, yeah, Jorge, are you interested in working in this? Well, that could be, maybe Jorge's the best person for that. Maybe you're having a little bit proximity bias because there he is, you're looking right at him. All right. Similarly, who gets professional development opportunities, maybe who you nominate to participate in a discretionary academy or something like that. And then maybe even who gets promoted. That could be impacted by this. So I'm just going to ask you a yes, no question in the chat. You could put a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you feel that you have seen this in your work life? I would say, especially in the last 2.5 years. I mean, if you were remote before then or hybrid, fine. But I'm just kind of curious if you feel like you have seen or experienced it yourself. Okay. Of course, I'm seeing them all come in. I do not have one of those brains that like calculates in the moment, but it looks like maybe 50-50, maybe a little bit more leaning toward the yes, I've seen it versus the no. Okay, and then there was a question. Yeah, so Oscar says, how do these concepts apply when the entire staff is working remotely? Well, that's something, I'm not trying to be cheesy about it, Oscar, but that's something we could get into more, when we have a little bit more time. I think it's maybe less of a concern because everyone's on equal footing, but it's still something to consider. Instead, I would say, like these bullet points that are on the screen, I might say, if I'm the boss, I might say, am I making an effort to have FaceTime with all of my team? Am I, making sure I'm engaging people during meetings? Am I encouraging, looking at the next to last bullet point about professional development opportunities, with my completely remote team, am I still pushing the idea of professional development, even though they're remote? Nothing has changed. They still need professional development opportunities. So I think that's maybe how I would answer that question quickly. And thanks for asking. Okay. So I've got some statistics from another place, not an architectural firm this time, but SHRM, SHRM, which probably many of you are familiar with, but that stands for the Society of Human Resource Management. So these are like the big deal HR people. Okay, so this is from a very recent survey that they conducted about remote and hybrid work. So I'm just going to read them, and then I'm going to ask you, what can we learn from this? So I've got 5 stats for you. Here we go. 67, so obviously way more than half of the supervisors that they surveyed. Oh, hold on just a sec. We've got a couple of folks unmuted. Okay, there we go. 67% of supervisors of remote workers admit to considering remote workers more easily replaceable than on-site workers. So just let that sink in for a sec. Here's the next stat, same number as it happens. 67% of supervisors say they spend more time supervising remote workers than on-site workers. All right, next. 62% of supervisors believe full-time remote work is detrimental to employees' career objectives. Next, little less than half, 42% of supervisors say they sometimes forget about their remote workers when assigning tasks. And finally, 72, the highest number that's on the screen right now, 72% of supervisors say they would prefer all their subordinates to be working in the office. Just, you know, if I had my druthers, everyone would be here. All right, so just kind of taking some key phrases from those. More remote workers, more easily replaceable. I spend more time supervising the people who are remote. Remote work is detrimental. I forget about them. And, you know, if I could control the world, everyone would just have their rear end in the seat right outside my office. So in your opinion, and I won't be able to read all of them, but what can we learn from these statistics? Or if you want to kind of change the question, I'm seeing, ew, yuck. But you know, what's your response to this? I mean, these are pretty significant numbers, in my opinion. Only one was under 50%, and it was 42. I mean, so this is like a majority of supervisors anonymously acknowledging they have some negative feelings about remote workers. Okay, people are resistant to change. Managers are lazy, stuck in the past. It may depend on the type of work that people are doing, kind of like that influences how they feel. Okay. Yeah, and Ashley, this is from a SHRM, SHRM 2021 survey. And if you Googled that, I think you would find it. Okay, Society of Human Resource Management. Yeah. We need to shift our thinking from all in person to hybrid. It is a major shift. That's Sean's comment. And I appreciate that you're acknowledging, like, we can look at this and go, oh, this does not seem good. But then we also, I feel like, to be fair, we have to say, you know, they were asked their opinion. They're giving their honest opinion. And it does require some change management. And maybe initially it is more work to have a remote or, you know, hybrid workforce. Maybe managers need more training, suggests Ella. April says, I'm a supervisor and I don't agree with any of these. Okay, good. And let's see, I'll read one more. Francine, last comment in the chat so far. I think supervisors who feel this way, oh, sorry, it moved up, Francine. This is Francine's comment. My team is quite productive working from home. It's a privilege they don't want to lose. All right, thank you. And then Jennifer, that's the one it shifted. And so now I'll read Jennifer's. I think supervisors may not have found a way to connect with their telework team. And so they're feeling a little disconnected. Right. Thank you so much for all the comments. Okay. So how can we, in your opinion, like, let's just do a little bit of group problem solving right now, whether or not you relate to those comments on the previous slide. How can we proactively reduce proximity bias in our hybrid teams? Like, what can we, and even if, I'm not saying that the bias exists in your world, but we want to make sure it doesn't kind of sneak in. So what could we do to reduce this likelihood that people look negatively on those who are remote or hybrid? Okay. Cameras on, better training, proper tone from the top, organizationally from the top, right? Keep an open mind, daily connections using some kind of virtual technology, connect online, seeing each other, make assignments on a rotating basis. Okay, that's interesting. That's kind of a self-check for managers. Keep like a delegation log. Here are my employees. Here's what I've delegated to each of them, and then really do a self-assessment. And is this, am I fairly distributing the workload? Am I giving the high profile or, good, whatever that means, good assignments to everyone? Okay, make yourself available on Teams. Yeah, have some independent spaces in the workplace. Good. Weekly team meetings, lots of mentions of cameras on. Office hours where all staff have equal access to the supervisor. Okay, we've got so many good ideas. Of course, I cannot read them all, but you can take a look. And of course, you could copy anything from the chat that you want to. Team building exercises, rotating staff for coverage, talk through problems. Excellent. Very good ideas. All right. Thank you. So I am going to share 3 that I had on my slide. I'm sure some of your comments have intersected with what I already had here. So we'll go through these quickly, and I'm going to check my time. Okay, we're doing great. So the first idea I have is pretty basic, but just be aware that it is a thing. Proximity bias is a thing, and make others aware. Educate yourself. Obviously, you're doing that now, but you could Google it, read an article or 2 about it, and talk to other managers if you're a manager, or just, other employees about it. Raise awareness. This is a thing. And if you're comfortable and you think you see it happening, politely call it out, or at least ask the question. I'm a little concerned, that we're not giving equal time to the folks who are remote. Could we maybe start with them when we report out at the next staff meeting or something like that? Even if you're an individual contributor, you don't have to have a title to do something about this, right? Kind of one of those, if you see something, say something situations. You could do it politely. Often that means in the form of a question. Hey, would you consider doing this? Or I think I may have noticed this, whatever, and then just politely lay it out, see what happens. Okay, next, switch your focus to output and outcomes. And I'm sure many of you are already on this page, but this is, I think, especially for those of you who manage other people. Structure your performance reviews around what's actually been achieved, not how much work you perceive has been done. We can, and another way that proximity bias can rear its ugly head is the perception that those who are in person more often are doing more work because we see them more often. So we have to train ourselves to focus on output and outcome rather than just perception of being busy, if you want to say it that way. All right. And then number 3 is pull. I'll explain that in just a minute. It sounds a little harsh, but I'll explain what it means. Pull feedback from your employees. So pushing feedback is where you give it. Pulling feedback is where you ask for it. You solicit it. So ask and keep asking for input from your team about how their hybrid work arrangement is going. Don't assume everything's fine. Well, I'm sure they would tell me if it weren't fine. Don't assume that. Ask, keep asking. They may not be honest, or, I don't mean they'll be deceptive, but just they may say, I'm fine the first time. But if you keep asking, they'll know you're sincere. And there may be something that's not working for them, or they may feel like they have there's some kind of bias against them because they're remote more often than other people or something like that. So ask them, put it, verbalize it, put it in front of them, kind of normalize the discussion around how's your hybrid work arrangement going. And I think you're much more likely to get, honest feedback and then be able to make changes when possible. Okay, and appropriate. All right, good. So thank you so much for your contributions in the chat. Let's talk about the second thing, which is creating community within your team. So again, I think it's easy to hear that and go, oh, more parties. I mean, I'm all for a party, a work party, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. But I know this is like, man, she's got lots of statistics in this webinar. Well, yeah, statistics or data points are good, right? So did you know, this is from a recent Gallup poll, that employees with a close work friend are 7 times more engaged than those who don't have a close work friend. So I don't really expect you to answer the did you know question. It's just a thought question. But this is an actual statistic. Now, I think engaged, that's one of those HR words that gets bantered around a lot. But, like willing to, this is the definition I typically use for engage, willing to exert discretionary effort at work, willing to do more than the bare minimum to meet expectations. People are, according to this poll, people are more likely, much more likely to exert that discretionary effort at work if they have a close work friend. Now, some of us are like, that's not really why I go to work. Or like I like liking people at work, but like I have a huge family and I have lots of friends. And so I'm not really going to work to try to get a friend. Well, that's not exactly what it says. I mean, I think these often kind of happen organically, right? But like someone you relate to, someone you commiserate with, you can talk to about stuff that's going on in the office. Yeah, Teresa says relationships are everything, whether you're looking for it or not. But I think what's challenging about this is like, how do we do this? Hold on. Okay, hopefully I'm back. I got a little notice about my internet. Hopefully I'm back on. So like, we can't force people to be friends with each other. Nobody wants that and it doesn't work. Anyway, so I know a couple of people have responded already in the chat, but just again, Y for yes, N for no. Have you found this to be true for you? Like you're more excited to get up and go to work when you have a work friend. I'm just curious. And I mean, any answer is okay. Honest answers are what we're looking for. And if your answer is no, that's all right. Like if that's not really motivating for you, that's okay. I would say with this little impromptu survey, much more, I mean, I'd say it's about 90-10. Like 90% of you said, yes, I've experienced something kind of like this. Okay, yeah, somebody says big time. And I don't have any close work friends in this job I'm in now, and it's kind of a bummer. Yeah, and some people say, I love working. Whether I've got friends here or not, or friends at work or not. And I get it. That's great. You have that intrinsic motivation. Okay, so what can we do to encourage people to have a little bit more social interaction in this hybrid workplace? So I don't expect you to answer this. This is just a thought question. This is where I'm headed. So how have you encouraged more social interaction, especially if you're a supervisor? And I mean, the answer may be, I'm not sure I have, maybe that's an area I need to work on. And again, some of you may have some mental pushback, like, seriously, we have to get work done. I'm not encouraging social interaction at work. I'm encouraging work at work. But I think there's a way to do this, encourage more social interaction, and it not necessarily be a party. So it's social interaction that has some kind of work basis. So let me share where my mind is with this. I've got some ideas, 3 ideas, and I'll present them from an individual perspective and a supervisor perspective, because I took a guess that of the almost 200 of us, there would be a mix in the room. There are probably some supervisors here, and there are probably some individual contributors here. So, and I see you all are throwing out some ideas. I love it. Let me show you what I was thinking. Okay, so one idea is, if you're an individual contributor, take a class, take a work class, like a webinar like this, or a half day or a whole day class or whatever, some kind of professional development class, and then have your action item, in addition to learning stuff, have your action item be to network with other people that are there. So you see how there's a social aspect to it, but it is still a work activity. That's what I was trying to get at here. Okay, so for the supervisors in the room, encourage the professional development opportunities. Encourage your people to attend classes, maybe participate in a mentor program if you all have that at your organizations, things like that. And then let's say someone does attend a class, require them to share their knowledge when they get back from class, share their knowledge with the group. Here are the top 3 things. So I want people to sign up for classes, at least 2 classes in the next fiscal year. And I also want you to do a 5-minute presentation within a week of attending that class and share with the team what you learned, what your top 3 takeaways were. Super simple. There's some accountability. People get a little bit of an opportunity to do some public speaking, which is what people fear more than death. Only snakes, according to Gallup, only snakes outdoes public speaking as far as fears go. So your next idea I have is, as if you're an individual contributor, connect with the subject matter experts at your job who are important to your work. Not in HR, right? You need to make friends with someone in HR because you will need them someday. Okay. And it's not just someone in HR, but in any other people, and that is worth investing in that relationship. Okay, at work. If you're supervisors, if you are a supervisor, something you could do is create some kind of knowledge sharing group. And
Hey,
we don't
Allison,
have
sorry
time to
to
dig
interrupt.
into like exactly how you would do that. Or, we can get into that more in the half day class, but that is something that you could do. Okay. And finally, was that you, Marissa?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Service is a bit choppy.
Oh, okay. Let
Yeah.
me mute myself for just about, if you all will give me 20 to 30 seconds, I will plug into my router. I'm sorry. I did get a couple of notices and I don't know what's going on, but give me about 30 seconds. I'll be right back. I apologize, everyone. Just
No
a
problem.
sec.
Just hold tight, you guys. Thanks for bearing with us.
No worries.
I'm back. I'm plugged into my router. My apologies. Okay. So, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go forward. The last idea I have in this regard is I'm going to be asking you for some ideas here also, and it may seem a little bit like a tenuous connection, but one way I think to build some community is to make sure I'm taking care of myself. I'm more like as an individual, right? I'm more likely to be able to be a friend at work if I'm healthy and practicing some self-care. And then for the supervisors and managers in the room, you know, am I investing? And it doesn't necessarily have to mean money. It certainly might be, but investing time and money and like conversation in wellness for my team. And so I want, yeah, sorry, Adalberto, in the interest of space, I had to abbreviate. So KEN, Ken is just an abbreviation for knowledge. Sorry. Okay, knowledge sharing. Okay. Looking at this self-care and wellness business, I'd like to find out from you, what are some ideas that you have for practicing self-care in the hybrid environment? What have you done, or what ideas have you heard that might be helpful for the group to hear? Some self-care ideas for hybrid workers. Deep breathing, gratitude journal, actually taking your breaks, walking outside, exercise, meditation, sleeping on a regular schedule. Okay, excellent. Yoga, making sure to laugh. Okay, I love it. Very good ideas. And then I will ask you from a supervisor perspective in just a minute. So here, keep your ideas coming. I know they're still coming, and I appreciate that. Here are some that I came up with. I came up with 3, and I think you may have covered all of them. But one is take all of your regularly scheduled breaks. Don't work through your breaks. They're there for a reason. They're your legal right, and they're for your health. And so you should take them. Also think about giving your eyes a rest. Step away from your computer. This is a big thing. I know I have a colleague who had a very serious during the pandemic reaction. Her eyes and her brain had a very bad reaction to being on the computer so much, and she really had to take this seriously. So even if you, and hopefully you didn't have that situation, but it's so important to step away from the computer. What the doctors and optometrists and everybody is saying is about every 45 minutes. So of course it can coincide with taking your breaks, but you might need to have non-computer time even more often than your regularly scheduled break. So you don't have to have a break from work, but a break from the computer. Okay. And then finally, you might consider using some kind of a free self-care app. And I just did a little bit of research and I came up with 3 that had, one is called Calm, one is called Headspace, and one is called 5-Minute Journal. So you can research those and find what works for you. But just for instance, several of you mentioned gratitude and that 5-Minute Journal app. It's not strictly about gratitude, but that is part of it. And so I thought that was interesting that you all brought that up. Okay, wonderful. Now, from a supervisor perspective, my kind of generic advice at the top is invest in wellness. And I already said that doesn't have to be money. It can be money. It could also just be time. But what springs to mind for you, for all of us supervisors and managers in the room? How can you invest in wellness for your team? What might that look like? Okay, I love it. Be strict about keeping your meetings to less than an hour. Kip suggests 45 minutes. Yeah, so people have kind of like that passing period, if you want to say that. Passing period, what if they have a 9 o'clock meeting and a 10 o'clock meeting, and I'm not trying to be rude, but people should have time to go to the bathroom and get a beverage and maybe process their notes from the meeting they just ended, right? There should be time. We have to think about humans. Okay, excellent. Take a personal interest in your employees. Share wellness ideas. Yeah, show concern for them. Absolutely. Okay, really good ideas there. Ask people how they're doing. There's a nice no cost idea, like treat people like humans, not just a means to an end. Absolutely. Okay, so here are you keep your ideas coming in the chat. That's great. Here are 3 ideas I had. Ask, how are things going? And how can I better support you? Again, I want to be the kind of boss that looks at the people who report to me as people, not just a means to an end. Okay. Celebrate staff accomplishments. Not everything's a party, but something can be a party. So, and this doesn't have to be a party, but it could just be a shout out, verbally acknowledging staff's accomplishments and also incremental improvements. And if you knew me personally, you would know I'm a very task-oriented person. I like finishing stuff, but so I got to make sure I watch myself. I'm not only looking to just call out my staff's completion, but also when someone's just getting better at something, that deserves acknowledgement. Okay, yeah, encouragement, praise, recognition, absolutely. And then finally, if it's appropriate, depending on what conversation has preceded, but remind employees that they have the employee assistance program, whatever acronym or you all use in your world, but EAP is kind of the generic employee assistant program. Probably all or almost all of you have some form of this, where it's a free service. You get maybe 4 sessions or of counseling or something like that, and just remind employees that they have that available. And you could also offer low-cost wellness benefits. And in case you're like, well, what would that be? Well, I'm not trying to be cheesy, but I would say Google it, because I did. I Googled low-cost wellness ideas, and there were thousands. Literally, I mean, of course, there was some overlap, but I mean, literally so many that were either no cost or low cost. Things you could do, legitimate things you could do that show your employees that you care, that promote health and wellness and self-care on your team. Okay. Yeah, and I like what Eric said there, last thing in the chat, provide support for the small things so they don't become big issues. Right. So, I mean, one thing we could add in this column about supervisors is like have regular one-on-ones, right? Just make sure you're meeting with your employees. In my opinion, it should be weekly, individually. Okay, very good. So let's move on to our final topic, which is balancing me work and we work. And this may seem a little odd, this quote that I have, it's from Pablo Picasso, the artist, but he says, without great solitude, no serious work is possible. Now you may say, oh, okay, but he's an artiste with an E on the end. You know, is that really relevant to government work? I think so. I think so. We're not producing masterpieces from an art perspective, but I do think one of the beauties of hybrid work is that sometimes we all get to be alone and we don't have all of that sensory input from the office. And we're not, like, people don't have unlimited access to us. Like, we're available, but it's not the same as, 8 hours a day being available for anyone who wants to pop into our cube and, I'm keeping it real, hold us hostage. And so I think there is something, I mean, to me, that's one of the awesome things about hybrid work is the ability to have some solitude. But then we got to think about, okay, well, when should we all be in the office? Because we can't all be like this, right? We can't all be Picasso in some, shack in France or whatever, producing masterpieces. But we can use the alone time wisely and then the together time wisely. And that's where we're going with this. So when we do come together in person at the office, which is my assumption with a hybrid work situation, in my opinion, we're balancing these two things. Efficiency, meaning wisely using our together time to get good stuff done, but also building relationships. So we've talked a little bit about that already, but let's talk about this efficiency. And I mean, how do we get this balance? In my opinion, the most direct way of doing this is to have a team operating agreement, a written document that the whole team works on together, where you agree, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to communicate given this hybrid work situation. Here's how we're going to, for instance, hold meetings given this hybrid work arrangement. And everybody has input. Of course, the manager makes the ultimate decision, but everyone agrees to the parameters. So I just chose for the last few minutes of our webinar to focus on one thing, which is meetings. So I would assume that when you come together, a hybrid team comes together in person, there would be a meeting or two happening. So how should we handle that? What is the best use of our time together? Well, for this, I drew from a book that I read and had a pretty big impact on me. You may be familiar with the author Patrick Lencioni. He's most famous, I believe, for writing the book 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Probably many of you are familiar with that. I see Maria nodding her head. And so I think this other book that I'm about to mention did well. It's just not as famous as 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, but it's called, rather humorously, Death by Meeting. And so it is all about meetings. And what he suggests, let me read this quote from the book. Lencioni says, We need to have multiple types of meetings and clearly distinguish between the various purposes, formats, and timing of those meetings. So in a way, he's saying, not all meetings are created equally. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of some of the things he suggests that I think were relevant to our discussion about hybrid teams. So when we come together, how should we be using that time? So one thing he suggests, right? So he says there's different purposes, formats, and timing. Okay, so he suggests having a weekly tactical meeting with the team. So at least once a week, everyone's in the office together, having a meeting. So what's the purpose of this? Review weekly activities and metrics and resolve tactical obstacles and issues. Like, it's very boots on the ground. I've got to get this and this done this week. Here's something that's in my way. What can you do to help me? Those kind of discussions. So interestingly, the format, which I'm admitting it's a tiny bit scary, but here we go. He suggests that the format is to not have an agenda before the meeting. Now, I know a lot of us are like, wait, but best practices for meetings is that you have an agenda. Again, if you embrace his approach, which is that different meetings have different purposes, formats, and durations, I'm just telling you, this is what he suggests. And I do think his premise makes sense. Until I hear from everybody and what their needs are this week, I don't really know what the best use of our time is. And I mean, there's something that's quite logical about that, I think. So he says, don't set an agenda until you kind of do this round robin and everybody goes around and does a quick report about what their hurdles are, what their needs are. And then he says you have to be very strict and postpone those strategic. So this is called weekly tactical, right? The next one I'm going to talk about briefly is called monthly strategic. That's more like step back, like more big picture. Okay, so if somebody brings up a discussion that's definitely more big picture and strategic, you as the facilitator have to be, if you want to say, courageous enough to say, we're going to put that in the parking lot, or we're going to put that on the agenda for our monthly tactical meeting, which is happening 2 weeks from now. For now, we just got to get this stuff done this week. And I think that's really interesting. Okay, so what's the duration of this weekly tactical meeting? 1 hour. That's it. 1 hour. So we're not overburdening people. And if we take that comment from earlier, maybe we would say 45 to 50 minutes instead. Okay, but you're doing it religiously. It's not when we can work it in. Nope. It's every week. Okay, so again, just to give you the flavor of the next one, he also suggests this monthly strategic meeting. So this slide is going to look very similar to the one we just saw. Here we go. What's the purpose of the monthly strategic meeting? Discuss, analyze, brainstorm, and decide. Make decisions, right? About critical issues affecting the long-term success of your team or department. Doesn't that make sense that you should be in person for that? I think so, but we're not going to overburden people with this type of stuff. This is once a month. Okay, so what is the format of this meeting? You do have an agenda for this meeting, but you try to limit it to 1 or 2 big topics. Like, these are really important things that we need to address. You can prepare, of course, an agenda. Based on those weekly tactical meetings, you know what the 1 or 2 strategic things are that you need to talk about. You can circulate an agenda, and you can ask people to do, if you want to say, homework or research to prepare for the meeting. And be courageous. I saw Oscar says, I need to have more courage. Be courageous enough to ask for good conflict. Now, we won't go into everything that means, but that means honesty. We're not being polite. We're not being rude, intentionally rude, but we're not editing ourselves so we're only saying nice and safe things. we're courageous enough to say, I'm not sure that idea is going to work, and here's why. But you've had time to do your research and you're prepared. You've got some data to back up your point of view. Okay, so what's the length of this monthly tactical? You could probably guess about 2 hours. So I want to know, what do you all think about this idea of using your in-person time this way, a weekly tactical, a monthly strategic? Is this resonating with you? Can you see maybe, and maybe you do something like this already, but if not, like, can you see implementing something like this? Let's see, Michelle says, love this idea. And let's see, Sean says, I found that those who are the most vocal tend to take up the most time. I would use a timer. That's what I would do, Sean. And it may seem a little weird or maybe a little juvenile at first, but it could just be, I'm committed to trying this out and I want us to all be committed. And so everyone has a 2-minute max while we do the round robin or something like that. And then the timer goes off and you say, I'm sorry, Deborah, your time is up. We're going to have to go on to the next person. And people will very quickly learn how to hone their message if you cut them off. But you have to have those facilitation skills. You have to have that courage. Yeah, thanks for asking that. All right. Okay, good. I'm seeing the comments in the chat. And let's see, Kelly Marie says, we adopted this several years ago and credit it with why we have thrived during the pandemic. Okay, that's a great testimonial. Thanks, Kelly Marie. Appreciate it. All right. So as we wrap up, I know we're at in the last few minutes of our hour. That discussion that we just had, right? So we're balancing efficiency and relationship building. I view that discussion about the different kinds of meetings, that's kind of in the efficiency. So how do we do this relationship building when we're all together? Well, we're really talking about building trust, which is of course a huge topic. I have a few just parting words. Show people you care. I think that's come up in many of your comments already, and some of the things we talked about. Honor your commitments. If you say you're going to have a weekly one-on-one, that is not negotiable. Other things don't, unless it's truly a crisis, other things don't preempt or trump your one-on-ones. That sends a message to your people that they are second class. So if you're committing to a one-on-one, honor that commitment, always keep it. That's just an example. And then finally, be helpful. And I know that sounds kind of like a platitude, but I think it really, what I am thinking is pulling feedback from your employees. And the simplest way is just commit this question to memory and ask it often. How can I be more helpful to you? We don't have to, tippy toe around it. Put it out there to your coworkers. If you're an individual contributor, think about asking your boss that question. This isn't just a top-down discussion. I'm an individual contributor. Imagine what might change in my relationship with my boss if I asked her, how can I be more helpful to you as an employee? I think that's a pretty big deal. All right. So thanks so much for your time. This is my last slide. Think about building those relationships while you're hybrid. The half-day class where we delve into these topics more is on October 3rd. Thanks, Marissa, for putting the registration link in the chat. I hope to see you all there. And there's my email if you need to reach out. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for an excellent presentation, and thank you to all of our attendees. We appreciate you being here with us today. You will be able to find today's slide deck and recording on the link provided in the chat. I will post it again right now. Please note that the recording will be available later this afternoon. It takes some time to upload, so it will take an hour or so. You'll also find the link to register for the full class in the same blurb in the chat. And lastly, please take a minute to fill out our post survey to share your feedback with our presenters. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. You guys have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. And Francine, I see your question. How can we share this with other managers? You're welcome to take those links from the chat and just copy them. You know, you could put them in an email or whatever. Yeah, you can share the slide deck and the registration information. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Marissa.